So as we've been working through Psalms over the course of the summer, as you know, most of you know that we've been looking at a variety of different emotions that we experience in this life. And so the one that we're going to be looking at tonight is the emotion of fear. Now, when we typically hear fear, we think immediately bad, don't we? Anybody think good whenever you think of fear? None of us think anything good whenever we talk about the emotion of fear. However, fear can be good. There can be some things that are good about fear. Chip Dodd, in his wisdom, asserts that fear does at least a couple of things. One, it awakens us to danger. And then secondly, it leads us to pursue wisdom. All right, so it awakens us to danger. Whenever you go stand on the edge of a cliff and you're up really high, your body and like the fear, the emotion of fear kicks in, and what happens is like you kind of get weak in the knees, right? You're like, I think I need to step back. That is good fear, right? Like that, it's helping your body kick into gear of like, hey, don't step over the cliff because it's going to lead to disaster. This is good fear. It also leads us to wisdom. Whenever we have fear and we look at life, especially as you start entering into adulthood, you start taking on some responsibilities and things, and you recognize, man, I don't have life figured out. Whenever you're a teenager, you're like, I know everything, right? My parents know nothing. I know everything. But then whenever you hit adulthood and you start taking steps outside of the house, you're like, oh, wait, I don't know as much as I thought I knew. And so here's some ways that like fear takes shape whenever we seek wisdom. Plans are the product of healthy fear. Like whenever you are making plans, what are you doing? You're putting vision to practice. You're looking ahead and you're seeing the ditches that might be in the road ahead of you, and then you start making plans to help make sure that you stay on track and that you're headed in a good direction. This is healthy fear. Like fear can be visionary, but it can lead you to good places. It also is what leads you to mentors in life. Whenever you step into adulthood, you recognize that there are things that you don't know, and so what do? You try to go find people that have experience as well as wisdom that can help you make plans or help you think about what to look for in the years ahead. And so you seek out mentors, and we seek these trusted individuals, and they help us head in the right direction. This is healthy fear. So fear can be good, but the problem with fear is when it grows impaired. When fear grows impaired, then we find ourselves in trouble. Impaired fear is anxiety. Ed Welch, he's written a book on fear that I think he illustrates the difference between healthy fear and anxiety really, really well. All right, so he says fear is what makes us jump from a moving car that's headed towards us. All right, that's healthy fear. Like, okay, I'm going to jump out of the way of this car that's seeking my life. And so your body kicks itself into gear and it moves you out of the direction of the car. However, anxiety is the lingering sense after the car has passed that life is fragile and we are always vulnerable. There is healthy fear, but impaired fear is anxiety. And we feel anxiety widely and deeply, don't we? Anxiety is experienced by many today. Reports have come out that 1 in 3 adults in America experience the effects of anxiety and depression present day. That's a huge spike from the last decade. Like 10 years ago, it wasn't anywhere close to that, but 1 in 3 adults experience anxiety. Anxiety is more accessible today. We have news outlets that are literally 24/7 news outlets that are seeking to bring breaking news constantly to us, which means that there is regularly put before us information that in centuries ago they never would have had any sense or idea of what was happening. I mean, you have wars that are really brought to your eyes that you never would have known about 100 years ago. It's more accessible than ever. War, disease, climate change, political turmoil. All of these things are more accessible to us than ever before. And because of all of this, anxiety is more psychological than ever. Since we know more, we fear more. I mean, you have more phobias and disorders that have come out in the last 15 years than what you could put together in literally lifetimes before it. We have FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. We fear commitment because there might be a better opportunity that is just ahead of us. And so we have a fear of committing. You also have cancel culture, right? We fear transparency because we don't want to be socially rejected. And so what do? We kind of hide things about us or even convictions, what we don't share. I mean, disorders and phobias are coming at us in droves. And since the impairment of fear is wide and deep, the Bible addresses it consistently and foundationally. What you see, the most prominent and consistent command throughout all of Scripture is do not fear. It happens 365 times throughout the Bible. That is a ton. Do not fear, the most consistent command in all the Scriptures. And the foundation of the command is the character of God. It's rooted in who God is. The reason that the Bible tells us so frequently, do not be afraid, is because of the character of our God. And the psalm that we're looking at tonight is rooted in that foundation. Psalm 46 makes some very big statements about God and the consequences for our life in response to them. So here's what the psalmist does in Psalm 46. You can break it down into three different segments. First, he declares the greatness of God. We see this in verse 1, and then he addresses our greatest fears in verses 2 through 7, and then through 8 through 11, he issues a grand invitation. And so we're going to consider these three things: the greatness of God, our greatest fears, and a grand invitation. And as we work through this, as I prayed before, my prayer is that God would give us a new perspective for life, that we would not just have a knowledge about the greatness of God, but that it would seep into the experience of our own heart. What we will find here is that fear is actually what eradicates fear. We need a bigger fear than what we constantly, regularly practice, all right? So we find first we need to look at verse 1 to get a perspective of God that the psalmist has, and we find it in verse 1. Here's what it says: God is our refuge and strength, a helper who is always found in times of trouble. God is a helper. A refuge is what you run to in the midst of danger. So what you see with ships that are at sea and what you see with armies that are at war, they need a place to run whenever danger sets in. Boats go to bays. Whenever storms start to come at them, they find a bay that they can set themselves in. When an army has to flee because the enemy is taking them over, they need a base that they retreat to. That's what the psalmist is saying, that God is for his people. He's a refuge, and a good refuge is strong. It can withstand the danger. And so, you don't want to just go to any bay. You don't want to go to one that's like halfway underwater. You go to a good bay if you're a ship at sea and the storms are coming, so that it can stand against the waves. And if you're an army that is fleeing the enemy, you need to go to a base that can actually fortify itself and stand up against the enemy. And that's what the psalmist is saying that God is this powerful, strong refuge that no matter what comes at them in life, that they can stand up against it because God is the one that they hide themselves in. And the psalmist views God as both this refuge and strength, but he's not just a place. He's not just an inanimate object. He's a person. He's a helper that can be found in times of trouble. In other words, for the psalmist, he's one that cares. He's not one that you just run to as a place that has no desire or affection for you, but you actually run to God as a person, the living God that has spoken all things into existence. This is the one that we run to, and he actually cares whenever we come to him in the midst of trouble. I think the best human example of this is a parent. If you've watched a kid, whenever they experience danger, what do? They run and they hide behind their parent, and then they grab the leg. You know? Anybody ever seen that or experienced that? We see this with our boys, all right? So we have gone to, our boys have like this, I don't know why, kind of fear when it comes to dogs. I mean, even the like smallest chihuahuas, you know? They'll walk into a house, and if there's a dog in the house, they immediately get scared and they run behind Cherish or myself. They'll grab our leg. And here's what they're doing. They're expecting us, as those who love them, to step in to help, right? Fear overcomes them. They run to us as refuge. They view us as strong. They grab the leg, but then there's an expectation that we will step in and help in the midst of what feels like an overwhelming fear that might overcome them. This is what the psalmist is saying that they do with God. When trouble comes their way, God is their refuge. He's the one that they flee to, that he is strong, and that whenever they run to him, he actually cares and he steps in to help. Now, here's where it breaks down with my kids and me, is that sometimes they have too big of a view of me and what I can do to help them, right? There are times that they come and they run to me expecting that I can do things that I cannot do. I find this most whenever there's a toy that gets broken. They come and they think dad can fix everything. That's more my dad, not me. I can't fix many things, and so they come, and what do? It's like, yeah, son, I'll do this, but then I take it to Pops, and Pops fixes it, and then I bring it back, and I get all the glory. The thing that is great about God and what the psalmist has complete confidence in is that he does not have his limitations that I have. God does not have the limitations that I have, that he is the one they can always run to as refuge, always has the strength, and that he's always the one, the helper that's ready to come and step in the midst of trouble. This is why in verse 2, the psalmist says, therefore we will not be afraid. And he puts this to the test by looking at two of our greatest threats and fears in this life, literally the world falling apart and the world turning against us. We see this in verses 2 through 7. So our two great fears. Look at me with me in verses 2 through 3. It says, therefore we will not be afraid, though the earth trembles and the mountains topple into the depths of the seas, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with its turmoil. One of our greatest fears is that the world will literally fall apart, both literally and figuratively. We literally fear the world falling apart. My wife and I, Cherish and I, watched a show on Hulu called Paradise. It's this apocalyptic show. And what happens is like they literally give you this scenario about the world coming undone, and there's only about a few people that survive. I'm not going to ruin the rest of it, but what they do, this is why like we think about this so often, they figure out how to put into view what we imagine in our minds. Like they've somehow captured in scenes and scenarios what are like some of our worst fears. I mean, when it comes to family dynamics, when it comes to humanity, I mean, they put all of it before you, and it's like, this is the worst case scenario. I am terrified. And Stephen King says, I love to scare people, and people love to be scared, and this is why we constantly go to shows and movies like this. This is why there's like a iteration of that comes out about every year to 2 years. There's always a movie that's apocalyptic, or there's always a show that's in times like this is the worst case scenario, and people flock to it. We continue to watch it. They love having our money, right? So we literally fear the world falling apart. We also fear the world falling apart figuratively. We work really hard to build a life for ourselves. We work really hard at finding a profession that we will love and then building a career out of it. We work really hard to find someone that we love, that we can build a life with. We work really hard to pay for possessions that we take care of that are going to help us build the kind of life and dream that we've wanted. We work really hard to find friends and invest in friendships. We work really hard to build a portfolio. And after we have built up all these things, what do we do with them? We worry about them. We're literally worried about the world that we've built for ourselves falling apart. One of our greatest fears is that everything will come crashing down at about any instant moment. And that's exactly what the psalmist is trying to capture here for us, is that the world could literally collapse. But not only that, he also in pictures for us that the world turns against us. What he does in verses 4 through 7 is he actually has the city of God in mind. The city of God, while inside the walls, everything is tranquil. He talks about this river that flows through it. Everything is peaceful and calm. God is within her. She will not be toppled. God will help her when the morning dawns. But then verse 6 happens. It says, nations rage and kingdoms topple. So literally, everything is peaceful and tranquil inside the city of God while the rest of the world is building up its arms to take it down. All of the nations working together to literally work against, to turn against the people of God. One of our greatest fears is the world turning against us, both societally and personally. We fear the world turning against us societally. We view this with like the way that we see wars taking place. And what's the question that we regularly wrestle with? When is this coming to my borders? I mean, we look at what's happening in the Middle East. We look at what's happening over in Europe, and we're like, man, is this going to make its way to us? I mean, this is why we constantly are drawn to these news outlets. The fear of the world turning against us personally hits a little bit closer to home, though. Have you ever felt like everyone is out to get you? You ever had one of those days where it's like, it just feels like everybody is kind of like coming after me? We have this in our home. Our boys are very competitive. And so they'll play basketball downstairs in the basement. And anytime they feel like everybody is just working their hardest against them, immediate tears. It's like, they're all trying their hardest against me. You know, they're all working against me. 3 brothers against 1. They're all coming at me. And Cherish and I are just like, no. They're just playing the game, you know? But there's days that come around where it's like everyone is just out to get me. It feels like it in your home. Feels like it in your workplace. Maybe feels like it even as you're driving down the street, you're like, the cop is coming for me today, you know? If you see like 8 of them, they're like, they knew. They were here waiting for me, you know? Even like last week, we had one of our sons that had one of those days, and he was just like hit with some of this stuff, and like Cherish was sitting down and talking with him, and Cherish was like, is there anything else? And he's like, well, I didn't know it was going to rain today. You know? Like everybody's just out to get me. We live with this constant defensiveness, and we're always guarded because we're fearful of the world turning against us. Psalmist says here that God's people will not succumb to these fears because of how great their God is. However, we succumb to them regularly. I've dabbled with photography a little bit since I was in high school, and I've learned enough to be dangerous. So I know some things, but I have to regularly go back to like the manuals to try to figure out how to work the camera again. But one of the things that's sort of stuck with me is this technique called forced perspective. And what you do is you use angles and proximity to make small things look big and big things look small. So here's a picture of it, all right? You've all done this, haven't you? I mean, we have the cameras in our phones, and so we pull it out, and so we've done this. You have a little water drop in this picture, and then you have a person that's clearly bigger than the bottle as well as the water drop, but it looks like it's about to just fall and break this dude's head, you know? It takes a small thing and makes it look big because of the angles and the perspectives. Look, this is what anxiety does for us. Anxiety magnifies things that are actually small and makes them look really big, and then also takes really big things and makes them look small. That's what anxiety does. And here's how this fleshes out. Let me just kind of like lay it out for us, all right? This is why we worry about money so much. We worry about money because we believe it's what's going to provide us ultimate security. And so you have a number in your head that you need in your savings account for you to feel comfortable. And whenever that number starts to fluctuate or gets below the red line for you, what do? Anxiety begins to build up inside. That could be your 401k. It could just be your checking account. But we deal with this with money. You're viewing this as the small thing that is big in your life, and it produces anxiety inside of you. We also do this with how other people view us. When people view us and it doesn't match what we desire to have in terms of how they look at us and perceive us, it can either inflate us or it can crush us, all right? This happens at work all the time. When you go in and you get affirmation, whenever this is something that you prize too much, what does it do? It inflates your head, right? I'm incredible. No one could ever fire me around here. I'm irreplaceable. It inflates our head. This is just pride, which is oftentimes the opposite end of anxiety. But whenever we get critique, it can also deflate us. It can ruin your day. You're sitting in the meeting, everything is going well, but you get the critique from the boss, and then it just wrecks your entire day. Ed Welch, I think, puts it well in his title. He says, when people are big and God is small, that's exactly what happens oftentimes with our fear of man. We inflate people that have skin and bones, just like us, that struggle with the same things that we struggle with. We make them entirely huge, but then the things that are actually large in life become really small. And the psalmist desires more for us than this. And he wants to share his view of God with us. And that's why he issues a grand invitation to us in verse 8. Here's what he says: "Come see the works of the Lord, who brings devastation on the earth." Here's what he says actually through 9 through 11 too. Just kind of take this in. He makes wars cease throughout the earth. He shatters bows and he cuts spears to pieces. He sets wagons ablaze. And he says this is God speaking, "Stop fighting and know that I am God, exalted among the nations, exalted on the earth. The Lord of armies is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold." The grand invitation here is to come to God and see how great he is. The psalmist declares it in verse 1. He compares God against our greatest fears and says, these even we will not be afraid in the midst of our biggest fears, the world falling apart, the world turning against us. We will not be overcome or afraid because of these things, because of how great our God is. And then the psalmist invites us in, not just to know this, but to experience it. He doesn't want you to settle with just knowing things about God. He wants you to come to God so that you can experience these things for yourself in relationship with him. Come, see the works of the Lord who brings devastation on the earth. What this is really like, the psalmist is trying to bring pictures before our mind. And what is happening here is saying, think about the flood. Think about Genesis chapter 6. What happens with the flood is the creation is not giving commands to God and then he's submitting to creation and then the flood happens. What you see in Genesis chapter 6 is that creation is responding to the voice of God. The world is coming apart, but who's in control? It's God. God is the one that's in control. And what does he do? He saves humanity through one family. Like he literally holds he has all the power in his hands. Come see the works of the Lord. The devastation that he brings on the earth. And then verse 9, he makes wars cease throughout the earth. He shatters bows and cuts spears to pieces. He sets wagons ablaze. He's trying to bring the Exodus to mind here. What happens is God's people are trying to flee out of Egypt as you have the world power pursuing God's people, and fear sets in. Anxiety sets in. They start losing their minds. What's going to happen? But what you see is that God steps in. We know the story. The cloud comes and separates God's people from the Egyptians who are pursuing after them with wagons and spears and arrows. And then he parts the Red Sea, and God's people walk on the dry land that has been covered by the expanses of the sea. And they make their way through it, and then the Egyptians start pursuing after them. The waters close in on them. The wagons, the spears, the arrows, they're crushed, they're toppled. They're not set ablaze, but they actually drown. And this is all the work of God's hand. And the psalmist, he's saying, come and see these things. In fact, don't just come and see them, come and experience them. Here's why he's doing this. He knows that fear is what ultimately trumps fear. We need a fear that is bigger than the world falling apart. We need a fear that is greater than the world turning against us. And it's a fear of the God that has created the universe. We need to view God in proper perspective, where everything else isn't small, it isn't big, and God is small, but where God is big, and in contrast to him, everything else looks small. This is how we deal with our fear. That you have a fear that is greater than our earthly, manly fears that we have. That you have a God of the universe that is so big, that is so powerful, that is so strong, that he can overcome any and all of it. But look, here's what we see with God in terms of our fear. It's not a fear that we shake in our boots at him. It's a fear because of what he has done for us out of his love for us. This is found in its peak in Jesus. What we see in Psalm 46 is that God is actually, when he says God is our refuge and strength, he's our help in times of trouble, he's picturing Jesus for us. Jesus is our refuge, and he is our strength, and he is our helper. He's literally dealt with the worst things, the things that should capture our fears but often don't. Jesus is the one that has dealt with everything and all of them. I mean, what we see with the testimony of the scriptures is that Jesus is our refuge and strength against the punishment of sin. We deserve punishment for our offenses against God. God is right in his anger against sin to bring punishment upon us. But what we see in the scriptures is that Jesus has actually bore the full weight of that for us. Here's Romans 5:9 for you. How much more then, since we have now been justified by Jesus' blood, will be saved through him from wrath. On that judgment day when God is ready to give punishment for sin, what we have in Jesus is refuge and strength. A helper in times of trouble. We deserve punishment for our sin. But Jesus on the cross has bore the full weight of God's wrath for you. So you will not stand and receive the punishment that you deserve because you're hidden in Jesus. He's your refuge. He's your strength on that day. He's your helper. He's the one that he comes and he gives full witness. I paid for that. He's the refuge and strength against the threat of death. 1 Corinthians 15, 54 through 57 says, death is swallowed up in victory. Where death, I mean, literally, Paul's like, he's talking trash on death itself. Like, where death is your victory, where death is your sting. Verse 57, thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. The thing that used to bring such fear and such anxiety to our life, we now can taunt it because of Jesus' resurrection from the grave. Not only has Jesus paid for your sins on the cross, but he's also been raised for your salvation. Meaning, like, one day you're going to get the resurrected body just as he is. You will not be overcome by death, but Jesus has overcome death for you. So you no longer have to view death with this sense of dread, but now it's just, the way the scriptures talk about it, is just a mere nap. You wake up in the arms of God. Because Jesus is your refuge and strength, but he's also your refuge and strength for the present troubles and hardships of life. I mean, as he's standing with the crowds in Matthew chapter 11, what does he say to them? Verse 28, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I mean, one of the commands that, or the instructions that he tells them as he leaves them is, I will never leave you, nor will I forsake you. I'm with you always. My burden is light. Come to me and I will give you rest. Jesus is your refuge and strength. He's the one that comes, and he's actually the one that like gives you the deep sigh of relief in life, because he's done everything for you that you cannot do for yourself. You couldn't live perfectly. Jesus has done that for you. And because of his perfect life, his complete death, and his victorious resurrection, he now shares it all with you. To where like you don't have to live with the burdensome load and the anxiety of, am I getting it right? Am I getting it right? Am I getting it right? Because Jesus has done it for you. And so that you get the deep exhale of life, that you get to live with God, because Jesus is your refuge and strength, and he helps you in the troubles and burdens of life. Now, here's what we need help with. We need help in knowing, how do we live with this as our experience in life, right? Because a lot of us know all of this that I've just said, but yet we still struggle with anxiety. We're still overwhelmed. We're stressed to the max. So what does it look like for us to actually take this, to have the confidence that the psalmist in Psalm 46 talks about, to where you can look at all of our greatest fears and troubles in life and say, God is our refuge and our strength, our help in times of trouble, therefore we will not be afraid. One of my pastor friends, also a mentor, says that there's 3 things that you do. First, you gaze, then you worship, and then you wait. You gaze, you worship, and you wait. You gaze at God by saturating yourself in the Bible. St. Augustine gives us 3 Latin words. I'll explain this, but you can write it down. Retentio, contemplatio, and delectio. All right? Retentio, contemplatio, and delectio. All right? Here's the explanation. Retentio is you learn what a passage says and means. All right? Whenever you go to the Bible, you set with it till you can understand it. One of the best ways you can know if you understand it is if you can put it into your own words, and then you can take it to references, Bible teachers that you can trust, and you can see that it aligns. All right? If you can do that, then you've understood it. You can say it in your own words. Then secondly, you consider it till the truth takes root. And how do you know if the truth takes root? Your soul catches fire. Once you've sat with and you considered and wrestled with the truth to such an extent that you can feel like your heart a little bit ablaze. Sometimes this is kind of a dull fire, all right? It's not always like this forest fire that's going off in your heart, right? Sometimes it feels kind of dull, but you sat with it until the passage of the truth takes fire in your heart. That's contemplation. And then the last one is that you enjoy him. That's delectio. You delight in him. You enjoy him. Once your heart is ablaze, like you enjoy him. You gaze. You take the scriptures. You set with them to where you can explain them. Your heart is set on fire for them, and then you can enjoy God with him. Then you move into worship, all right? So as you enjoy him, you're moving into worship. And here's what happens whenever you worship God, God becomes big in your head and your heart. You see God for who he is. Finally, the things that once seemed so big now are put in their place and actually appear small, and God is actually big because you see him for who he is. As the scriptures put him before us, your heart and your head align to where you can actually move forward with him. And here's what happens: it lifts your head. In anxiety, what happens? Your head is down. You can't find your way out. You're overwhelmed. Is this ever going to end? How am I going to make it through? I'm destroyed. There's no way that I have hope moving forward. But in the moment of worship, when things are finally put into proper perspective, God is big and everything else is small. What happens is you lift your head. And the last one is that you wait. The psalmist of Psalm 27 says, I'm confident in this. I'll see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. He waits. As you enjoy God and you can lift your head, you can be confident and content as you wait for his timing and not expecting him to function according to your watch, but you functioning according to his watch. Because you see God for who he is and what the Bible says about him, you can wait because you know that he will show up. He will be the one that helps in times of trouble, that you can find him when trouble comes around. And so what do? You wait. And so my pastor mentor says, you gaze at God, you worship God, you wait for God, and then these overcome fear. There was, last summer, probably one of the worst fears that I could possibly have seemed to be playing out. My family, 5 out of the 6 of us got pneumonia. But our third son dealt probably with it the worst. And about a year ago from this past week, it would be a year ago at the end of this month of July, he couldn't walk without holding on to a wall. I mean, he would literally fall over because he was so disoriented. And so we took him to the doctor immediately, and they're like, we don't think it's anything too troublesome, but just kind of keep watch on it. Like, it just continued to get worse. So we took him to the emergency room. And as we're at the emergency room, they start using things like ascending paralysis, where it starts in your toes, and your body, paralysis begins to work its way up your body. It shuts down your organs, and it leads to mortality. And so we're getting this news from doctors as we're sitting in the emergency room, and what do you think sets in? Anxiety. I mean, my world is falling apart, and it feels like everything is turning against us. I mean, my heart is racing. Thoughts are surging through my head. I mean, tears are readily available at any moment, I mean, we're walking with him around the emergency room just trying to maybe something will happen, And guys, all we could do is think to run to the promises that we had in God. Pleading with all that we had. And literally just waiting because everything was completely out of our hands. And as we're doing this, I wish I could say, that my heart was just a tranquil place, that the river was running through my heart, and that There is no fear. That's not what was happening. But as I look back on the moment, I can see how God was the one who was there when we called on him in our times of trouble, and he was our helper. As we pleaded for his intervention, like, our son isn't dead, nor is he paralyzed. He's a fully functioning 7-year-old boy. Like, he was faithful to us. He heard our prayers. He heard our cries. He stepped in. He interceded. He took care of our boy in a way that we could not. And here's where I stand today. Even if it's just incrementally larger, my trust in God has grown. To where I can stand in a state with a little bit more confidence. I wish I could be a Psalm 46, the psalmist here. God is our refuge and our strength. We will not be afraid. But as more and more things like world falling apart and the world turning against me, I do sense that there is more peace that resides in my heart than where we were a year ago. And I think that's your hope as well. Look, we run and we cling to our refuge and strength in Jesus. We stand on the truth and foundation of God's word. We set with the truth until it sets our hearts ablaze. We worship God where we see God is big and everything else seems small. And then we wait. And time over time, God grows a deeper sense of trust inside of you. And look, one day when we stand before Jesus and we see him face to face, all fears will finally be set aside because the greater fear will truly set in. We'll be with God in his presence forever, and we'll have nothing left to fear. God is our refuge and strength, a helper who is always found in times of trouble. Therefore, we will not be afraid. So a few questions. What does your fear look like today? Do you live with healthy fear or impaired fear? What's big in your life? Is God big? Or is everything else? And lastly, will you receive his grand invitation? What you see in verse 8. Come see the works of the Lord who brings devastation on the earth. The Lord of armies is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. The invitation is there, ready for you. Will you come to Jesus? Will you place your hope and faith in him? And will your heart be settled in him? Let's pray.